I have former FBI Steve Friend with me to go over what it's like to be a part of an FBI investigation, what this investigation into the Trump shooting might look like. He also has some insight based off congressional hearings that he said, I don't think people are really thinking about. Steve, thank you so much for coming on again today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, wanted to just start off with, your thoughts on this assassination attempt. Somebody high up in Secret Service, a whistleblower, now saying they believe with 20 plus years of experience that there is going to be another assassination attempt. What was your first reaction when you heard that former President Donald Trump had been shot?
Well, I mean, immediate shock, just I think like the rest of the country, just from a personal standpoint. But I think that my instincts kick in that we always talk about Occam's razor. I think I just call it the government midwit razor, where it's incompetent people doing incompetent things incompetently. And there's all these theories out there that there was a grand conspiracy, but I'm a fact guy. I would need to see concrete evidence of some nefarious intent. I think the far more likely thing, if I was going to speculate, is that the security measures that are in place for not just Donald Trump, but other protectees additionally are woefully inappropriate. And this is just the first time that it's ever been tested. I mean, you are presupposing that they're always at their best for this in order to have been some grand conspiracy. I think it's far more likely that you have people at the end of the allowable spectrum on their job at the very bottom level. And when you combine all of those components together, it compounds and you can have a catastrophic security failure, which is what we all witnessed about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. You've been watching the congressional hearings. I've been watching them. Lots of details coming out, lots of, what's the right word? Counter arguments, for lack of a better word, where they're saying, oh, we're being told this. And then you have like Cheadle and others saying, no, that's not true. But it's like, wait a minute, somebody just testified for an hour that it is true. What are you shocked at some of the inconsistencies? And from your perspective, does it seem like they're being somewhat evasive in giving the American people answers?
They are completely, and it's by design. I think it all goes down to the fact that it's the wrong person in the room answering those questions. You take someone like a Cheadle or a Christopher Wray from the FBI. Christopher Wray has publicly said that he has oversight of the FBI. He's sort of insulated and bubble wrapped from what's going on. I'd be far more interested in hearing from the deputy director, Paul Abate, who kind of has his hand on the pulse and knows what's going on in those investigations. But those guys are rarely called in front of Congress. So that's sort of a hack around accountability, because they can put up these directors who don't really know, and they're doing their best, maybe intentionally obfuscating, being vague, but then they also have plausible deniability, which is a problem. The congressional representatives that have these guys in front of them need to be drilling down. They need to have people in the ear like me or other guys to kind of know the exact terminology to pin these guys down on, so they can't parry away from it, because it's all too often that they will answer the question with a non-answer, and it's incredibly frustrating. And then I think also the other problem is just the mindset of the interrogators in the process. The vast majority of those senators and Congress people that are interrogating them, they're like system guys. They just want the system to operate, and they view having a hearing itself as success. Whereas you and me and the American people see success as an outcome being the answers that we need. And there's a big disconnect between the people and our representation.
Yeah. Do you think these members of Congress don't know who the right people are to bring in? Or do you think it's just tradition to bring in the head of the organization?
I think it's probably both. I think that's just their default answer. Again, system guys, when we want to find out what's going on at the Secret Service, let's get the director of the Secret Service. But these are enormous bureaucracies. I could tell you that the FBI is roughly 38 to 39,000 employees, 56 field offices. It's a pyramid structure. So Christopher Wray or his deputies, they're surrounded by a small cadre of people inside the Hoover building at the 7th floor. I mean, I was working in rural Iowa with 3 people in an office in a bank building and going out on an Indian reservation. My experience in the FBI is vastly different than the FBI director. So knowing what's going on, getting the pulse of what the actual agents are doing with their actual investigative work is not going to be something that these guys are going to be able to answer or even willing to, because they don't fear accountability at this point. They haven't been called to the carpet. Even though Cheadle resigned, that's a personal decision. She's not going to face any criminal charges or anything of the like. And Christopher Wray continues to see the FBI get an enhanced budget every time he goes up there and obfuscates and refuses to answer questions.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed with Cheadle and the other gentleman, I just forgot his name. It'll come to me. But whether it's Senator Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley or somebody saying, you know, who is the person, or has that, if you don't want to give up a name, has that person been fired or removed from duty, or and they refuse to say it's a person. It's always like, well, no, it's you don't understand. This is a process. This is a procedure. And it's like they refuse to say that there's anybody that makes decisions or does the planning for the Secret Service. To me, is that like an umbrella of protection? I get like, hey, at this point, we don't want to release a name because that person could be, you know, have their life put in danger. But like, yes, that person has been fired or set to the side until the investigation, but none of that's happening. They just keep blaming it on a process.
And there's supposed to be some sort of internal investigation about conduct of what went on. That would be reasonable. I think that's sort of the process they're talking about. But they haven't been put on any sort of restricted duty. They've been temporarily assigned elsewhere. They're not collecting a paycheck, which is utterly shocking at this point when you consider the fact that some of the guys that I've become acquainted with and friendly with over the last couple of years have been accused wrongfully and provably wrongfully of doing things that they didn't do. And then the FBI immediately put them on the shelf, indefinitely suspended them without pay. And for a guy like Marcus Allen, 27 months, a guy like Garrett O'Boyle, 22 months. And it's been adjudicated that those guys didn't do anything wrong. So I think really, even though that there might've been a massive screw up in the eyes of these federal agencies, the worst thing you can do is embarrass the agency by its own conduct. And that's why I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't actually gotten a scalp on the wall just to get the heat off. But at the same time, if they have a good German under there willing to just follow orders at the same time, I think that they're just going to take care of them.
Okay. From an FBI perspective, help me and my audience understand what kind of measures or tactics or procedures might the FBI be doing right now? I would assume they go out and investigate, they go to the crime scene, they start collecting, trying to get an account from many different perspectives. What is that investigation like?
It's going to be incredibly involved. It's going to have a lot of moving pieces in it. You would do a canvas. You would try to get witness statements. You would, believe they're going to get a actual voluntary interview with former President Trump, which is shocking that he would actually participate in that, and not just have it be in writing to his attorneys. They would want to get a ballistics calculation and adjudicate where each round was, assemble a timeline, which is what you saw the senators sort of talking to the U.S. Secret Service about, the sequence of events to recognize where maybe the security failures were. Because this investigation is, your bad guy is known. It's not a whodunit at this point. It's not trying to assign guilt or anything. They're just trying to collect the pieces and figure out how he was able to penetrate, because that will be useful information going forward. They should probably look into the communications that went on there, any sort of recordings of the radio transmissions, of the text messages that were going on between all the police and the Secret Service, any sort of security personnel. Even if they were using government phones, what were they doing during the timeline? Were they maybe scrolling their Facebook account when they should have had eyes on the crowd? All those sorts of things need to go on. Tons of interviews need to be conducted in order to assemble this. And here's the most worrying thing to me about this. During the Senate hearing, Deputy Director Paula Bate told Ron Johnson from Wisconsin that the FBI is going to investigate this as an assassination as well as potential domestic terrorism. Now, to the layperson, you think, okay, let's just look at all potential options. That seems reasonable to me. But for people who want transparency, if the FBI investigates this as terrorism, they're going to be able to slap a classified label on it. And they're not going to be transparent with the American people about what they find.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, it's like they want to get to the truth, but they also don't want to embarrass the agency. And so there's this conflict going on there. Why why would they want Donald Trump to testify? Just that, yes, I went there. Yes, I gave a speech. Yes, I got shot in the ear. You know, Christopher Wray tried to cast doubt on whether I was shot, even though it was on live national television. Why have him come in and testify? I guess I don't understand that.
I think it'd probably be as a procedure you want to attempt to have contact with the victim of the crime. Donald Trump
Okay.
being one of the victims, if it's assassination, he is the only victim, but there were other people who were injured and one did perish. So it's a procedural thing. And that's why I've said that he shouldn't go and talk to them. There really is no upside. If they want to send a list of questions through his attorneys, he can respond to them. But you're really only setting yourself up for sort of like a Mike Flynn trap, particularly when you're talking to the FBI, who has proven itself to be politically partisan, and they've gone after him on multiple occasions and meddled in the last 2 presidential elections against him.
Yeah. God, wouldn't that be something if he says something and they twist it and they're like, oh, you know, now we're trying to get a paper trail, kind of like with January 6th, right? Everyone kept saying, oh, Trump's been having these secret communications with these white supremacy groups or the Proud Boys or whatever. And like, they're just never found any communication trail linking him to these groups. And yet there was this attempt to do that. Switching gears just for a second, you know, within the last week, there was large gatherings in Washington, D.C. of people that were protesting for Palestine. They were doing, you know, graffiti, damage, vandalism, burning flags, taking down American flags, hoisting Palestinian flags, beating up police officers. And yet all of these people had their charges dropped very, very quickly. Why is that so different than what happened on January 6th, where most of the people were nonviolent, came into the Capitol, and yet they're being treated as if they're domestic terrorists. And these other people, I'm not saying they are, but they obviously crossed a line when it comes to peaceful protest. Why the different treatment of the two groups?
Because we exist in a post-fair process, a post system of justice that's equal for all, where Lady Justice is blindfolded at this point. You have a weaponized government who is picking winners and losers. And look, those charges that were dropped a week ago were for the lower court in Washington, D.C. It's a federal district, so all cases are federal, but they sort of have a difference between the local crime that does occur and the federal crimes that we generally understand it to be. They were dropped at a local level. They weren't even considered at a higher level, whereas the January 6 cases have all been adjudicated at the highest level of federal court, and they have just continued to weaponize the process, even despite the Supreme Court ruling about the Fisher decision, where the obstruction of an official proceeding was deemed to be wholly inappropriate of a charge. That's an evidence tampering tax law. And now the Department of Justice is going to bring a new charge, a 231 civil disorder, another felony charge, and they'll issue superseding indictments against those people, and it'll allow the FBI to claim additional indictments, even though those people have already been indicted. So they'll be able to get extra quota points, and then they'll be able to get extra arrest statistics to support a narrative that they have been propping up over the last 6 to 8 years about this rise in domestic terrorism that they can assign to anyone who is right of center. And the last thing I'll say is, this is so broad at this point that the FBI has a new term that they call anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremism, the acronym being AGAVE, AGAAVE. And the FBI itself, publicly available information, defines agave as someone who just has a perception of government overreach or negligence. Meet that profile and you could be in the crosshairs of a domestic terrorist investigation.
Jeez Louise, that's me. I'm not.
There's 56 men signed a declaration, I think, that puts them squarely in the scope.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm very distrustful of just about everything related to the government. Let's see. Oh, what was I going to ask you? You brought up on my show the last time you were on that the January 6th thing very quickly became viewed by people within the FBI as a career maker, a way to really beef up your resume, your curriculum vitae, whatever you want to call it. Do you think with situations like this Palestinian protests where there was, burning of the flag and an attack on police. Do you think some of it has to do with, I can't really get ahead with my career, it's not really worth pursuing, but this J6 story is so big, and there's so many big names like Pelosi and Schumer and other members of Congress that it kind of took on a life of its own compared to some of these other situations?
Yes, and the other thing to remember is that just the size and scope that they're able to expand it out to. So you have the Palestinian support protests going on comparatively to the size of just the number of people voluminously who were there on January 6th, it looks far smaller. And you're not able to spread it out the way that they manipulated the case management as they did with January 6th. So if you did everything by the book, January 6th should be run from Washington, D.C. as one case, and however many subjects you're going to investigate under that one case. But the FBI departed from their rules. And because there were so many people there, they said, we're going to open a separate case for every single person. And as opposed to having them be officially in Washington, D.C., we'll open it wherever they live. So if you live in Denver, now it's a domestic terrorist case in Denver. And that has allowed them to create the illusion, to get the narrative going about domestic terrorism. It's also allowed them to bring in more co-conspirators, for lack of a better term, because senior executives in all of the 56 field offices are tied down to their quotas that they have to meet, and their compensation is tied to meeting the quota. So 56 special agents in charge are getting bonuses. They're incentivized to drive their subordinates forward on these cases, to open cases, get arrests, use the tools. If you get a lot of people in those positions who are ambitious, and if you're a senior executive service person in the FBI, you're very ambitious to climb the ladder, you're going to get a lot more buy-in from them on that sort of case.
Okay. Why do you think Christopher Wray was acting genuinely when he said, we don't know whether Trump was really shot in the ear? Or do you think that was a subtle way of lowering the temperature of the story, the heroicness of Trump surviving, the empathy towards the former president, discrediting that he had bodily harm from an assassination? What are your? I can't understand why he would say that.
Well, he's certainly proven himself to be politically partisan, and also someone who's not unwilling to lie to Congress, as he's done on abundant occasions. But I think it also goes back to the fact that he is bubble wrapped and insulated. He doesn't have his hands on the case files. He's not really reviewing evidence. He is in charge of the FBI, but he's not really involved with the day-to-day work of the FBI. He's very much a figurehead. He's a DOJ attorney who can go there and have his nice hair and he bob and weave. And he's a high enough IQ guy to have the communication with the senators and the congressmen as is deemed fit in order to get and secure funding for them. But as far as actual cases go, he's not really involved. I mean, as much as it pains me to say, I'm inclined to believe that he just genuinely didn't know and then defaulted to what he always does, and that is obfuscate, never really give a direct answer, because you don't want to be tied down to saying things, well, they can then come back on you and say, well, you misrepresented those facts. And he did actually come back later and correct the record, but there was already the talking point, which I think is probably you could assign some nefarious nature to it as well, because it'll just be taken out of context.
Yeah. Okay. If you were a member of Congress, knowing what you know, who would you be calling in to get details from on the FBI side, and who would you be calling in to get details from on the Secret Service side?
Well, from the Secret Service side, you have to get the team leaders that were there on point, on scene, that were actually doing the site survey, that had the finger on the pulse there. You'd also need to get anyone within the chain of command who was responsible for signing off on which assets were going to be used at that point. Outside of that, when you go to the FBI, there's going to be a case agent or a squad that's assigned to it. There needs to be steady, regular contact between Congress and that person, and that person needs to be authorized to share that information with them. Congress does have oversight of the FBI, and you cannot continually hide behind can't reveal sources and methods. It's an ongoing investigation. And then the other thing that I would proffer is Congress has an upcoming budget fight this should be a leverage point for the House Republicans to say, you know what, we're going to stand up a parallel investigation independent of the FBI, because the FBI has proven itself to be pretty untrustworthy. You don't have to go back too far to the congressional baseball shooting when the FBI investigated and deemed that to not be an assassination attempt. I mean, that was a Bernie Sanders supporter who asked, where are the Republicans? And then he went out and tried to kill about a tenth of the GOP caucus. And the FBI said that was suicide by cop.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. And then on the FBI side, who you mentioned someone's name, but tell us who that was again. And then also anyone else that you would bring in.
Well, this is going to be investigated through the FBI Pittsburgh field office. I would not go to the special agent in charge of Pittsburgh. I would go to the squad supervisor and the actual case agent, who would not be known, just be a rank and file agent at this point, who would know what's going on and be able to assemble the facts that would be able to answer the baseline questions. And it would have to be a pretty regular check-in. I mean, I would expect to see something almost on a every other day basis up until we get to some greater length from the incident, when they've been able to tie up a lot of the loose ends, and then maybe do weekly check-ins here. But it can't be something like call us in 60 days. There needs to be enough resources thrown at this, and they certainly have them to investigate all aspects of this forthwith. The FBI loves to brag about all the tools that it brings to bear. They should be bringing everything to bear on this.
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, you have them saying, we need 60 days. You've called us in too early. This is why we're unprepared. This is why we don't have details for you or the American people. On the other hand, you have people saying, I think there's going to be another assassination attempt within 30 days. A copycat killer, someone who just says, wait a minute, we know that there's a weak link in the security perimeter. We'll just find the next one. Like, the timelines don't match up. And that's why I say it feels like they are purposely being evasive and holding back information. But it could just be the fact that the agency is already embarrassed, and now they're trying to reduce further embarrassment by hiding details from the American people.
And they're embarrassed. The FBI is loath to embarrass the Secret Service to identify their security lapses at this point. And then there's also this myth, this pervasive myth of competence that exists within our federal government. Everybody assumes because the Secret Service is the best funded and arguably best trained executive protection agency in the world, that they're really, really good at it. I think that's a precept. You're assuming facts that are not in evidence. I mean, how many assassination attempts have they actually thwarted? And the same goes for the FBI. The FBI is really competent at getting good headlines for itself and claiming credit for things that it does. But I basically devoted my entire social media presence to showing the American people, anyone who takes the time to read it, that that's not true. I mean, the lion's share of cases that the FBI feels should be bragged about, actually issue press releases so the American people know what they're doing, they're just cases that have been adopted by the FBI from local police. Like, the local police make an arrest, and then the FBI looks at it and says, oh, there's a federal nexus here. We'll just take that off your hand now that the danger's gone. This guy will be in custody the entire time, and we'll claim that we put a serial armed robber into federal prison, and go back to Congress and claim that that's what they did, when really it was a beat cop who happened upon a liquor store robbery and engaged in violence if necessary to apprehend a dangerous person. And now that guy loses the credit, his agency loses the credit, and the FBI swoops in and steals the day.
Wow. I take it that this happens more than we would guess.
Far more, because of the encroaching nature of the FBI, the FBI's partnerships with local agencies, where they say, look, we just want to assist you, which is a reasonable thing to do, and we'd like to see that. But, you will see a headline about the FBI stopping a serial armed robber and find out, well, he was just at a Lowe's in Las Cruces and he stole a washing machine. And then there was a vehicle pursuit with local police. He got arrested. But because he used a gun that was transported across state lines, the FBI came in at the end and said, we did that.
Gotcha. Okay. This is pretty recent, but did you see this new whistleblower letter that's come out about January 6th and the people within the Capitol Police? It's fairly new. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I haven't caught on to that. It's got to be real recent, because that seems to be something to be right up in my lane.
Yes, if you'll remind me, I'll send it to you afterwards. But since you and I spoke, a lot has come out about that with the FBI Has your opinion changed on January 6th in the last 6 months since you were on my show? And if so, in what ways?
Well, I think there's a lot of legitimate questions that are being asked and not getting the attention. And there's been some revelations that have come forward. And I'm friends with some journalists that have more to bring forward. The fact that there's not been any progress made on a January 6th alleged pipe bomber by the premier law enforcement agency for the country. The fact that Michael Byrd, who shot Ashley Babbitt, they have the radio transmissions where he, after shooting her, goes on the radio and says, "I am taking fire and prepared to return fire." That seems like post-meditated murder to me, particularly because he was cleared with a one-page memo from the DOJ that didn't even do an investigation. There are all these elements to it that have not been fleshed out. It's just a giant dragnet to get as many people in there before the end of the Biden administration, or actually before the statute of limitations is up on there. So I've been consistent on this. I think that there were some people that did some bad things. I think that there were people there that were professional provocateurs. I think that there were people there who were undercover and informants who might have driven people to do things that they were not predisposed to do. And I think that there were a large quantity of people, the vast, vast majority, who were just innocent Americans believing that they still lived in the alleged land of the free, where they had a First Amendment and could assemble and speak and petition their government for a redress of their grievances, and believed that if we walk through the people's house, that we will motivate the Congress to say, wow, there's 1 million people here. Maybe we should pause certification and do an audit. And those are the people, by and large, who have been pulled in by this dragnet and labeled as domestic terrorists. And that is not in the interest of justice.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you know anything about this? Representative Eli Crane asked the FBI during his time in the congressional hearing about whether Thomas Matthew Crook's home was scrubbed almost to the level of like cleaning a clean room at a microchip factory. And he kind of insinuated that they were cleaning to hide things versus cleaning to find things. Do you know anything about that? There's not a lot out there.
I don't think there will be because of the domestic terrorism label, but we can put on our speculation hat for a minute.
Okay.
And I've called this the playbook that the FBI has run for the last quarter of a century. It has been run on different people, but it's the same playbook nonetheless. And that is, they find a vulnerable person, someone who's maybe low IQ or indigent, down on their luck, lonely, emotionally disturbed, and they will poke and groom and prod them with undercover agents and informants, and increasingly now online, because they don't actually have to leave the office to do it. And increasingly, they're actually doing it with minors, people who are 16 and 17-year-old young men who are just angry and confused. And they will get them to agree to do something that they are not predisposed to do, so that the mission creep is set in. Now we have a new terrorism arrest, to the extent that there was a research project done in 2014 by Project Salam on the Muslim domestic terrorist arrests the FBI has done. And they found that only 4 of the 400 cases involved someone who was a legitimate threat to engage in terrorism. So 99% were essentially entrapment at this point. And in looking and trying to learn as much as I can about Crooks, he fits that profile quite a bit, which to me takes us back to labeling this a domestic terrorism investigation. Speculation: what if there already was one open and he was the subject of it, being investigated and primed and groomed to do something, go do a terrorism, and then just snapped or took matters into his own hand and didn't wait for the undercover to promise to buy him a weapon, but just grabbed his dad's AR-15 and decided to go and take a shot at the former president.
Yeah, wow. Okay, in our final minutes together, as you watch these congressional hearings from the FBI side and also from the Secret Service side, was there anything that jumped out to you that you maybe thought, I don't know that the American people would understand this, or that, wow, this is actually a bigger deal than people realize? Anything like that jump out at you?
There was an exchange between Lindsey Graham and Deputy Director Paul Abate at the Senate hearing. And Lindsey Graham asked if the FBI had been able to get into the encrypted applications that were on Crooks's phone. And Abate said, well, a little bit, but we're really not getting returns because of the encrypted nature. And he brought up, we need lawful access to get into these apps. And Lindsey Graham was head over heels ready to do backflips in order to give it to him. And he said something to the effect of, look, I'm all for privacy, but only up to a certain point. Very much like, I'm for free speech, but if we're in a war, maybe not so much. And that is, to me, the Trojan horse of the entire hearing, because the FBI has had the Going Dark initiative for a number of years, where they want the skeleton key, the backdoor access to encrypted apps. And just because something can be used for ill does not mean that it should be assumed to be so. I mean, we don't outlaw locks because you might be able to lock somebody in a closet and kidnap them. I lock the door on my house. I lock the door on my car. It's a useful tool. It's no different with encrypted communications. And the fact of the matter is, everybody's using them all the time because we don't trust government. Yeah. And that is an American heritage. That's a DNA of Americans. That's why we're probably all anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremists in the eyes of the FBI. But if you have a Republican, a senior level of Republican in the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's anxious to give the FBI that power when they've been proven to not be able to wield it, particularly with like FISA 702, I find that tremendously worrisome.
Yeah. The government is actually telling people in San Francisco, don't lock your car because your windows will be bashed in. Better to just let the thieves in. It's crazy the headlines that I read sometimes. Steve, I want to thank you for coming on. As more information comes out, I'd love to have you back on. You've got some new things going on in your life. Where can people follow you online?
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. In the meantime, you can follow me on X at Real Steve Friend is my handle. I have a podcast on Rumble called the American Radicals Podcast, which is rumble.com/amradpod. I do that with another FBI whistleblower. And I have a television program on patriot.tv/True Blue. That's on 5 days a week at 2 Eastern time. So folks can get all that. And the book, also named True Blue, is still available on Amazon.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for coming on. I wish you great success, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, man.